Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. I'm Jeff Jones, and with me is a partial panel today. We'll start from the top and welcome Big Jeff back to the show. Welcome back, Big Jeff.
Hey Jeff, how's it going? It's really cold here today in Massachusetts, and I'm really missing Jack 61 because at least he can relate to how cold it actually gets. I think it's going to be something like minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit with the wind chill this weekend. So not looking forward to that very much. But I am looking forward to is making a little bit more progress on this episode than we made last week, where I think we broke the record for the least amount of episode actually gone through. So my bold prediction this week is we're going to make it further than last week.
And thank you so much for joining us again, Dr. Silkman. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's great to be here, and hi to everyone on the panel and everyone in chat. Fantastic. Yeah, let's see if we can make a little bit more progress today. Right, guys? But so far, really enjoying the series and loving the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. I also, I've said it before, I'll say it again in the future, but I always learn more than I contribute, and I feel like I have the best seat in the house. So with that said, welcome back, Kellie.
Good morning, everyone. Coming in from sunny Western Australia. Today it's the sun is shining, Big Jeff. It's nice and warm, and I think this afternoon I'm going to take the kids out crabbing. So it's all about water today.
I will admit, though, it has been the coldest recently here than it has been in a long time. And so I do feel your pain when my feet get a little cold on the way to the golf course. And so I do think of you often, Big Jeff, when you toiling in the cold weather.
If you know where I can find some sympathy, let me know in the chat.
Based on my research, Wisconsin courts are more receptive to ineffective assistance claims than maybe they are in Illinois. If you can show that something the attorney did or did not do undermines confidence in the outcome, then that's something on which a court might grant relief. So, for example, if an attorney fails to present expert testimony that could have supported the defense, or, there are other cases that talk about evidence that could have shown that the prosecution's version of events was false.
I think that'll definitely apply here.
Yeah.
And then the defense argued the Denny standard was unconstitutional, but it's been part of Wisconsin law since 1984.
Exactly. They did a couple things that I think would go into what you were just discussing about ineffective assistance of counsel. One argument they had was that Denny doesn't apply to us, and there's no precedent for that. And then secondly, they said we don't have to prove motive, which there's no case law to support that type of argument.
So what's developing here is a pattern. I'll give you some examples. It's a failure on the forensic evidence to follow up on what they've got. It's a failure to follow up on leads in the police reports with certain individuals. The dog tracks, which, the scent dogs are all over the quarry. The cumulative effect of that would, of course, undermine, I think, confidence in the verdict, to just have so many things that you didn't do as a defense attorney.
Absolutely. And there are cases that talk about cumulative error.
Oh, good.
In Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And that's something that the court will consider.
Yeah. They're successful in getting the planted evidence theory in front of the jury, but it just has no impact because it doesn't have any substance to it. The blood spatter expert says he will testify that the blood by the ignition was put on with an applicator.
I'm actually amazed. I don't know what my fellow panel members think. I'm actually amazed that they were able to show this on MAM because this is revealing strategy, right? Basically the way the attorneys get together and work out a suitable strategy to write a reply or file a motion. I'm amazed that they actually released this. You know what I mean? It'll be interesting to see what the other, it's great for us because we can see what the machinations were, but I'm actually quite surprised that they allowed this to be shown on a documentary.
I can't believe Dr. Silkman literally read my mind. I was watching this and I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm thinking, holy shit, we're watching the strategyness of this team right now. And as you can see, they're looking for the loopholes in the law in terms of what is a stronger argument to get in there and then open doors. We hear them talking about the Bradys, and clearly they did touch base a little bit on the Denny's, and then they talked more so about the ineffective counsels and not hiring experts and such. When you kind of go back and you read a little bit about the law, majority of cases that have doors opening is usually the loophole. The highest rate of them is usually done by like a Brady. A Brady is usually what gets movement majority of the time. And there doesn't have, it was hard for me to find statistics in terms of like what was rated the highest overturning reasons to get movement in cases, but it appears that Denny is most likely the lowest. It wasn't very referenced in terms of being one of the reasons why things make movements. Usually it always rests on the court proceedings itself and fundamental errors, and then the Brady's in the trials and obviously the case itself. So yeah, it's very interesting to watch this conversation, Dr. Silkman, because I was thinking the exact same thing you just said.
Thank you very much, Kellie. It's almost reminiscent. I remember when Stephen actually was exonerated and Sheriff Peterson called everyone to his office to basically talk to everyone to say, do not talk to the press. And it would have been amazing if, say, the cameras were permitted to go in that meeting to see what strategy Peterson used. To me, this is almost exactly the same. You can see the way the lawyers were thinking, what their approach would have been. I would have thought, like Kellie, this is behind closed doors type of stuff, not something that you want to commit to film, because it can come back to bite.
You know, I think that's where I break with you guys just a little bit on this, with my background in documentary filmmaking and my background in, in filmmaking in general. Like, I think just as we're looking at this in hindsight, you just have to remember that this is a film crew in the room and that people talk different when there's a camera around. And I suspect that if I was going to shoot this, I would say to them, okay, you don't have to let me in on the actual meeting, but can you give me a recreation, kind of, that you don't have to give out the full details and you don't have to spill the beans in front of the camera? But I don't really know. I mean, this could be, she just says, hey, we're going to set the cameras up and this is a documentary and we go when we go. It's possible. I tend to think that because there's a camera in the room, I feel like you're going to hold back a little bit. But that's just me. That's just my own prism.
I can't believe they didn't have a blood spatter expert.
Yeah, it's like when you look at
Your
this
whole
thing.
theory is blood is planted.
When I've done murder trials, what I want the jury to hear is my story of what happened. And my story is going to involve a different scenario of who killed the victim. And I'm going to push that. That's at the top of my list to do that. Because if I can convince the jury that someone else could have committed the crime, I'm going to win. When I spent time with Josh Radon, he was very forthcoming with me and really went beyond what he needed to do to answer my questions. And I believe that he was completely credible. So based on his alibi, which we thoroughly checked out, based on my interview with him and the additional evidence he gave me, I ruled him out as a Denny suspect. So I crossed him off the list. The other thing I learned that was extremely important was that the suspected human pelvic bones weren't on his private property. They were on the Manitowoc gravel property. So we could then broaden the investigation.
If you were Kathleen Zellner, would have you struck off Josh Redon as a possible Danny? I wouldn't have.
I wouldn't have. No, I don't think. I think that's a. I'll give her this fairness. We don't know what they spoke about. We don't know whether she has a good a good,
Radar.
opportunity to characterize someone and pick up their vibes. She might be able to go, you know what, he was forthcoming, he had a good demeanor, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think it's fair for you to be able to just rule out someone because they talk to you, because we have cases all around the world where the killer is actually helpful to the people. They actually insert themselves. They don't run and hide. They do go in there and they are overconfident and they make out that they're helping out and stuff, and they're manipulators. So I'm not accusing, obviously, Josh of being the murderer. I'm just saying that you can't just rule someone out because they cooperated with you, because we have seen time and time again, all people of walks of life communicate and cooperate, even killers.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to totally remove Josh Redon when you consider the proximity of his property to where the crime allegedly took place, and all the fact that there was a lot of activity at Cuss Road and also at the deer camp. So you got to remember, he was one of the very first persons to associate a fire at the Avery salvage yard, right? So hence potentially he's pointing, look, guys, don't look over here. You should be looking over there. And the mere fact that the investigators wanted him to change his testimony in terms of how large that fire was, I think is actually quite telling. And if, say, Josh Redon, I'm not saying he did anything nefarious, but I tell you what, if law enforcement are coming over to you and saying, oh, look, are you sure it wasn't any bigger? To me, if you're Josh Redon, you're going, phew, I dodged a bullet, right? Because they're obviously not looking at me. They're obviously looking at Stephen or the salvage yard. So I think for Josh, it was a win-win situation. And my final point is, note, he had an attorney with him. So he was very careful what he said to Kathleen Zellner.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know 100% what she means when she says she eliminated him. I mean, maybe she just felt it wasn't worth the paperwork, right? I mean, she's got a strategy in mind. Her strategy is the same as it was, right? She's she's going to go for the constitutional violation, and soon we'll see the video that she makes with her suspect that she thinks it is from the Avery CD, basically, right? Drives her to a particular suspect who we all know who that is. So I don't know whether for Stephen's sake, right? There's more to pick from. From the legalistic sake, Stephen has already been denied making Denny's out of all his brothers. And anybody who was on the Avery salvage yard, he wanted to list originally as a Denny suspect, and he was denied all of them except for Brendan Dassey, right? So, I guess I'm not sure what it means. Does it mean it's not worth the paperwork, or does it mean that mentally she really doesn't think it's him? I guess I don't. I'm not sure. She does. She's already said, if she can convince the jury that it can be done that this could have been done by somebody else, then she's going to win. And I believe, I take her at her word. That combined with a constitutional violation, to get the new trial in the first place, is a recipe for a vacation of a wrongful conviction. So that's a recipe. I mean, she's the cake is burning in the oven right now a little bit, but she's told us what a recipe is, and that's what clearly she's been following. So. She doesn't need him, according to her current game plan at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point, Big Jeff. But the other thing is, of course, is that Josh Redon could have had rock-solid alibis to account for where he was during those critical times that the state is saying Teresa was murdered. So it's going to be a little bit harder to try and rope in Josh Rodon as a potential Denny. But that doesn't mean he doesn't know stuff that he's not saying, right? He may have seen things, he may have heard things. So I don't know. I wouldn't have released him as quickly as what Kathleen Zellner did.
Well, the cross off the list is kind of a permanent thing. You could always just say, "Oh, we're setting him aside as a Denny suspect to pursue other more viable suspects," right? You don't ever have to be like, "Nope, he's clear," because you can never go back, because then you'd look like a hypocrite to go back, right? Oh, well, it turns out we are interested in him now. Yeah, I guess that's just like my own personal angle to it. Like, you could just say but again, cross him off the Denny list. Not cross him off as completely, off of a suspect list. I'm not saying he's a suspect. I think you got to tiptoe around the words that they use. And what she said was cross him off the Denny list. And I don't know. I guess you guys could probably go on this one for a little bit. It seems like you have some pretty good evidence as to why he should have stayed on. Well, we'll never really know, I guess, moving forward.
Well, I mean, you do make a very good point there. You don't want to burn your bridges, because if you suspect Josh Rodon as a Denny and you tell him, right, potentially he'll just clamor up and not say anything at all. Well, when you think where he was, where his deer camp was, and his movements of that day, and plus it would have been potentially workers in the quarry, I cannot believe that Zellner didn't do a reconstruction of someone firing off a .22 rifle 10 times and putting up microphones and saying, okay, if what the state is saying is correct, who would have heard these shots, right? Because the state's position is that Stephen, in the presence of Brendan, shot Teresa Hobart up to 10 times. So hence, plus if he shot her in the garage, like an echo chamber. So the question is, could anyone hear it? Because remember guys, what Chuck Avery said. He goes, if there were gunshots, I would have heard them, right? And he's all the way down the gravel road, right? We're in his office area. So if someone had fired that rifle 10 times, would someone like Josh Rodon or one of his workers have heard it? And it's a pity that Kathleen Zellner never did that reconstruction. It could have been very telling.
That's actually a really good point, Dr. Silkman. But this is what we talk about being in hindsight, and we're listening to what she's saying now. There's a few things that she's already mentioned that I'm looking at my notes and I'm kind of looking back at the screen going, because we're all aware that she's just put out, obviously, a new PCR motion, which she amended, or housekeeping, and then she put the state did a reply, and then she got to do her reply back. But in her latest reply, we've seen a semi-new theory. And now the theory goes that she has put forward is that Bobby Dassey could have done all this at the Avery Salvage Yard, that he brought back the Rav and Teresa, bloodied and hurt in the back, took her out to his garage, shot her. I believe it was started to dismember her by putting her in the barrel and then driving the barrel over to the quarry and then beginning the burning progression, starting all that. So my point is, she's now saying that, but it kind of goes against everything that she could have done that would have helped Stephen to begin with, because now what she's essentially doing is there's a fine line. She has, by putting forward this motion, this reply and this theory in this motion, is that opening a door for the courts to turn around and go, hang on a minute, are you claiming that someone could do this on the Avery Savage Yard and get away with it without even Stephen Avery hearing it? So how does that rule then not apply for Stephen, that he could have done all this like the state has said and gotten away with it? Because if it's good for Bobby now, it's good for Stephen. And again, just before it went out, you hear her say her expert said that this was all done by a dripper. Now we've just read the reply and she's introduced two new tools, which is a sponge or a rag that was used to clean it up and then deposited and would have had to have been, diluted and then picked up and then spread. So that goes against everything her experts said, because never once in any of their opinions have they ever put a rag or a sponge as a tool. And Ange has already reviewed all the experts. This has already been ruled upon. And I'm feared that they're going to use that against her and say, can't go there.
Yeah, you definitely cannot overcomplicate it. And when you think about it, a rag or a cloth is mega absorbent, right? Whereas a sponge.
I've done an experiment with it, Dr. Silkman. I've still got it on my phone, to be funny enough. The moment I read that in the reply, I went back to my video and I watched it again, and I was just like, oh dear. It's it speaks for itself. Like you said, fabric, they're all absorbent materials. They draw in the fluid and they're a lot harder to actually release. Yes, you can squeeze it, but you would have to have the quantity of blood would have to be a lot to get any kind of passive dripping from it.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
I just wanted to weigh in for 1 second back to the, excuse me, my goodness, back to the question of, what may have Josh Redant have done to convince Kathleen Zellner. I think, I'm going to speculate here. If I'm wrong, let me know in the chat. But we do know that Kathleen Zellner has an affidavit by a person by the name of Travis Grohl, who is an employee of Josh Redant. And his affidavit says that he did smell a foul smell. We've talked a lot on this channel about how burning a body is not the sweetest smelling thing you've ever smelt in your life, and it can smell very foul. And Travis Grohl is the only one that I'm aware of that said he did indeed smell a very foul smell when he was working at the Josh Redant. Yes, exactly right, Jeff. He smelled something he never smelled before. It was rotten, but guess when he said that he smelt it? It was not, strangely, not on October 31st, but on November 1st. And Kathleen discovered this by talking to him. Did Josh Redant arrange for Kathleen to talk to his employees, and that's what she got out of it? And she figured somebody who was guilty wouldn't do that. I don't know if that's the mechanism through which she got in touch with Travis, but assuming that that's a possibility, then maybe that's what put her, over the edge on him. Possibly, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Big Jeff. But if you guys can help me out, maybe in chat, do you remember that there was a rumor circulating around that two girls near the gravel pit had heard 2 gunshots firing? I can't remember the exact date.
Is that the 2 girls that saw the fire in the Manitowoc Quarry?
Lights, I believe, in the quarry.
Yeah, the story that I heard, it was I think the same one, was that 2 girls that lived adjacent to the Manitowoc Quarry on Halloween were having a sleepover because it was Halloween, and they were out late and they saw a fire coming from the Manitowoc pit. They went to kind of check it out, heard a couple guys' voices, 2 men's voices. They got scared and ran away. That's the story that I've heard.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. And isn't it interesting, guys, how Mr. Kratz, in an interview he did, even said, how do we know Teresa Halbach was killed on the 31st, right? Even giving a hint that maybe she wasn't. So it's rather amazing how he keeps on changing the narrative in the story.
It's what plus why equals who. What happened? Why did it happen? If we understand why it happened, we'll know who did it. It's I'm the risk of oversimplifying that, but basically that's the pattern you want to go down. So
I just want to, for the panel and for everyone in chat, this gentleman and his significant part right now is he's actually, we see him in all her latest motions in terms of the DASI computer analysis, almost like he adds like a profiling kind of affidavit, which is kind of, he has, he puts forward that what he has reviewed in terms of the DASI computer, that the pornography that was being used was getting was growing, like it was getting quite excessive in terms of more and more. the way he words it, because I've read it 1,000 times, he doesn't point that there was anything prior in terms of mutilation or any of those horror searches. He references to it as the progressiveness of it stems from the excessiveness of it, that the count of how many times it was being accessed was just more and more. So this gentleman is very much a part of the now as well. So I just wanted to add that when we used to watch it back in when it first came out, what was it? What year did this come out? 2020, 2019? That we were all kind of just like, oh, just a gentleman that obviously has experience, but he has still stayed with Kathleen and her team, and he is still very much part of the affidavits and the proceedings now.
And he also worked with Professor Ann Burgess as well, and she's a criminal profiler, and she worked with the FBI, I think back in the 80s. And this was one of the very first time that the FBI profilers had developed a team whereby they would talk to serial killers, and just to basically get their psychological motivations, motives, why they did certain things. It's interesting that Kathleen Zellner employed Dr. Ann Burgess to do an affidavit as well. Yeah, very interesting.
Risk of oversimplifying that, but basically that's the pattern you want to go down. So doing a real thorough victimology. You want to know everyone she's been in touch with, and who they are and what's the nature of the relationship, and and all of that, especially close in time to the homicide.
Do you see any risk factor elevation with the type of job that she had?
Yes, she was going out, she's doing these auto trader things, shooting photos of cars in different places and different people. Again, she's going to go out and probably meet people she doesn't know. But 70 to 80% of people who are murdered by someone they know. So it's a combination of looking at that particular victim and then looking at the people around.
Remember, guys, that Tom Pierce, her boss, allegedly warned her about going into strangers' places where she was doing her photography for Auto Trader. And he even mentioned in a CASO report about the fact that some of the males would talk to her, chat her up, and invite her in for drinks, right? So again, it's very, very interesting that allegedly Tom Pierce had warned Teresa Halbach of those possibilities.
So just so we don't forget, Teresa Halbach also took boudoir photos, so you're going into people's homes and you are taking partially or fully naked pictures of people in sexually suggestive situations. One of which led to an extramarital affair, with a person named Bradley Check, who ended up divorcing his wife, and his wife filed a restraining order against him, and Bradley ended up texting Teresa on October 31st. So to me, that's a much stronger tie than Auto Trader, just because you're dealing with people. I can't imagine. I don't have the trust me. I'm well past the age where I want to picture myself in any position like that. So it seemed like that is the kind of behavior where you're sort of getting introducing yourself to people who who have that on the top of their mind, if that's the types of pictures that they want, which is fine if that's what floats your boat. I'm not saying anything against that, but it's, when you think about it in terms of risk and victimology, to me that sort of balances the equation out.
Well, the way this gentleman's talking right now, he's talking about victimology and around the people in her life. This, again, we're only getting a snippet out of the conversation, but the way I'm interpreting it as watching this, excuse me, is that he is referring to people that would have been inside her life that could have reasons or opportunity to want to harm or hurt, murder Teresa. This is leaning more towards the Ryan Hilliger side and the Bradley Check side and stuff. So, we're seeing him speak more about her victimology versus opportunity kills and stuff at this point. So maybe they cut out the part, or we just don't hear the part where he says things more like, maybe her victimology, what he's trying to say is her victimology right now is her work. Her work had some sort of risk factors. Like Tony said, like Big Jeff has just highlighted, you don't go into people's trailers, people are unknown, don't put yourself in those situations. So it's just really interesting when you go back and you watch this to where we are now, and then to hear how it kind of come together. It's refreshing.
I would dare say McCrary would have been just totally bewildered why a proper and detailed victimology was not really done. And we know exactly what Mr. Kratz said in court and in his book, that he was extremely upset with Buting, particularly Buting, who wanted to ask questions regarding Teresa Halbach's personal life. And Mr. Kratz wrote in his book that he felt so incensed, he wanted to go up to Buting and smack him in the face, right? Punch him in the head. Now, if you want to get to the bottom and try and work out a proper victimology, surely you've got to ask some real tough questions, right? And as Big Jeff and Kellie have alluded to, in a perfect world, you could do whatever you want anytime you want. But the problem is, the reality is that certain types of behavior, in my opinion, especially for a young lady, can be quite risky. And certainly if you're involved in a sexual relationship with a married man, to me, okay, that's your own business, but could it have exposed Teresa Halbach to risk, especially like Big Jeff said, taking risque type of photographs? You never know. There may have been individuals who wanted a little bit more, right? Allegedly, there was someone harassing her on the phone. I don't know if that's been confirmed or not, but it's very interesting that, in my opinion, that side of the investigation really was not hammered out. It seemed to me like very much like a tunnel vision approach, which I believe is very dangerous.
I think the tunnel vision comes from the timing, and I will call it Big Jeff's favorite saying, a man miracle. And the reason why I say that is because when you really break it down, the irony of it is, what time do they really have to do a victimology? For example, she gets called in as missing on the 3rd in the afternoon. The case doesn't hit the desk until 5 o'clock on Leslie Lemieux's desk. Uyghur doesn't get brought into the entire case until 5:30. So you've got all of the evening of the 3rd through the night to kind of be looking into this case. Then you've got the solid block of the 4th. What do they do on the 4th? Well, majority of what we see in the reports is they're chasing a number that turns out to be just Teresa's fax number, but they're going around and around in circles because they just don't do the most obvious and just go test their fax machine just to see the number. They go, the only victimology we kind of see them go down is when they get tipped off about Bradley checks, and then they start to go and interview him on the 4th. They speak to Tom Pierce. There's a few little bits that they are doing. They're going back and forth to the home, gathering some stuff, talking to the family, talking to Ryan, talking to Scott. But then by the morning of the 5th, it's all over. It's back at the Avery salvage yard. The RAV is found. So if I've already done this, I did a 48-hour block, because in any homicide investigation, they always start with the clock of the 48 hours. I timed it from the moment Karen Halbach calls in, because as much as you would say, well, technically she'd already been missing the 48, the clock had already begun. The clock starts when the investigation starts for the law enforcement. How efficient, how quickly can they overturn or get a lead? That's essentially the word, a lead. They were able, from the moment of Teresa Halbach's calling by her mum to the moment that Pam finds that RAV, they were able to pull it off in 43.75 hours. That's it. 43 hours and 75 minutes. That's how it kind of came up in my totality, is that's it out of 48. So they, not only were they so efficient, that it all kind of lined up for them, they did it under the required time. Not only did they not have a lead, they then had a suspect all in that time period. So then the victimology stops there. They don't need to go further with it because the answers are all back at the Avery salvage yard. Someone directed that there.
Yep.
Was it a man miracle? Did Pam find it by herself and the universe just aligned it? Or did someone force it happen in 43 hours? That's the question.
Right. But you see, there's two questions here, right? If we're thinking of a way to guide or steer an investigation away from other potential suspects and simply hone in on Stephen Avery or potentially events at the Avery salvage yard, you plant the victim's vehicle, right? And as you said, Kellie, within 48 hours, it was basically almost case over, right? They stopped really looking at anybody else. And the main focus was on the Avery salvage yard. Once that blood in the RAV was found belonging to Stephen and the victim, Teresa Hallbach, it was party over, essentially party over. So the bigger question is this: how would have this investigation panned out if there was no RAV? Say Stephen was clever enough to dispose of the RAV4, right? Because remember, he's smart enough, along with his nephew, a mentally challenged nephew, to expunge Teresa Hallbach from the property. There's no sign of her blood anywhere outside the RAV. Now, the question is this: what would have happened to the investigation had that RAV disappeared? Oh, I'd like to hear your comments, guys.
I think
If there's no RAV, there's no search warrant for the Avery salvage yard, and there's no key, and that's it. It's over. But there's all the stuff that was discovered that implicated Stephen was discovered as a result of that search warrant. No RAV, no search warrant. That's it. Done.
I mean, to put a needle through this thread here is just basically, had that RAV not been found, all the victimology stuff may have and probably would have continued, to start the circle here and work your way out. Who did she talk to today? Who did she talk to yesterday? What was she doing a week before? Ask the friends. And there's one point I want to make before I let go, and otherwise I would be remiss not to say about her victimology that her friends did say that she was involved in something she didn't fully understand, and that would have been dug into. The Brad Check scenario would have been dug into, but as we've said before, this RAV4 being discovered brought everything to a screeching halt.
100% correct. So if you've got a plan to plant, that's exactly what you do. And I remember having a lot of discussions with Kellie back in the day where people were arguing about the 2 RAV theory. That's the last thing you want. Because if you can uncover that one of the RAVs is fake, it's party over. What you definitely want is the victim's genuine vehicle with her blood, with her DNA in it, and then something belonging to Stephen Avery. And that's very, very hard to argue in court. And that's why it's so tricky for Stephen and also for Kathleen Zellner. It's almost like the perfect setup has occurred. But you see how the finding of that RAV is so pertinent to steering the investigation. That's exactly what you want to do. You factor in Sawinski's observation, and with allegedly he said that he saw Bobby Dassey on that RAV4, pushing the RAV4 with another person. And, it starts to become very uncomfortable, right? So it makes sense that, you direct the investigation, you halt the investigation by finding the RAV with Stephen's DNA and Teresa Hallbach's DNA. That's very hard to argue.
And that's the thing about the victimology, just quickly, I know it's going backwards, but if that RAV didn't get found, and I believe Jeff Jones just said it, that they probably would have just started having to move on. And I think that's where it would have gone, because they'd been spending a few days, well, half a day, then the 4th, looking at her victimology in terms of her work schedule that day. And we hear that phone call where they say, just before the RAV is found, hey, change of plans. The boss wants us to go back to Stephen Avery's. If you listen to the entirety of that call, he also says, and back to George Zippers. Then they have a laugh about George is going to be really pissed about that. So they do include both of the gentlemen in that call, saying that that was what they were going to do. They were going to go back and have a conversation with them. I truly believe if the RAV wasn't found that day, at this point, they would have had to have started to let them go. There was nothing that they would have had that would have caused or warranted a warrant. They wouldn't have been able, like, Stephen was very forthcoming. He already allowed them to do a sweep of his trailer on the morning of the 4th. There was no indication that her RAV was still there at that point. So if they would have had to let it go, then they would have had to open up the victimology side and then explore what did she do once she finished her jobs that day? Where did she then go? And then it goes back to what Dr. Silkman just said about the relevance and how important that RAV is, because without that RAV, there is no case. The entire case started because the RAV was found. If you take that RAV out, whether you believe, and especially more so if you believe there's two, because if you prove even once that it's not the right RAV, the case is over, because everything that was found in this case started from it. They'd have to physically give him the key and say, walk out, because you couldn't explain it.
Correct. That's a very, very good point. And we mustn't forget, they would have had no probable cause for a search warrant on the 5th, right? Because Pagel, Baldwin, and Drum flew over the property and quite low. They didn't see the RAV4 there. If they saw the RAV4 on the 4th, they would have had a search warrant. The cavalry would have come in, but clearly they didn't see it. So what Kellie summarized is perfect. Stephen did not obstruct law enforcement to come into his trailer and garage to search. He said, yep, come in, boys, check it all out. I got nothing here. He didn't stop the press coming in and asking him questions, right? And quite clearly, he can't stop a flyover over the property. He's got no control of that. And the other important point is this: he's got no control over the public coming in. Because remember, I think it was David Beach who came in during the week and gave Stephen Avery the flyer to put up in the office. So in other words, Stephen had the moment, if you believe Stephen had committed this murder, he had lost control of the most important piece of forensic evidence, the RAV4, right? It's a vehicle, right? And you can't tell me that he did a really good job in hiding it, because he obviously couldn't have, because he left that big tire with Toyota RAV4 on it, right? You could almost see it from the James Webb telescope. It's that obvious. So when you think logically, and all jokes aside, Stephen didn't do anything to really hide that RAV, put it under a tarp, in a garage, nothing. It was in plain sight. So therefore, why would someone like Stephen go to Crivets knowing full well that law enforcement are snooping, the public are all around his property, the press and law enforcement actually come on his property asking questions? You wouldn't want to go to Crivets, would you? But he did.
That's interesting, and I'm glad you summarized that, Dr. Silkman, because that's something that we've all questioned for a long time, and you said it so perfectly. But I've always got stuck in my own head, and I wouldn't be surprised if people in the chat will say, yep, I agree, or I've thought that too. Regardless of that, as a totality of, Stephen's connection, I always get stuck in the killers. You go to such an extreme effort to get rid of the body so there's no evidence, but you leave behind the vessel, the biggest vessel that could contain your DNA. It can contain, it's something that is, you would find the RAV quicker than you would find a body. And that's what everyone was looking for. They were actually looking for the RAV. You find the RAV, you'll find Teresa, because that was the connection that law enforcement put out very early, that she was with, the last time she was seen, she was driving around in her RAV. So someone preserved the RAV for a reason. Why? Why not, once you were successful in removing Teresa's body from Earth to be found, would you not then spend the energy to literally douse it and burn it? And whether you could put it on the middle of the road, at that point you wouldn't care, because there'd be nothing left connecting to you or the potential of it coming back to you. But to preserve it as an item that of discovery that eventually becomes the case, just baffles me, that you would just not get rid of the one thing that everyone is looking for that would stand out. And I know that I said that, burning it will bring attraction, all that, but there is other methods to get rid of it without having to visualizing, bringing it, drawing the attention, like dousing it with acid inside, or throwing it into a body of water where it would get rid of, for a little part at least, the side of it, but more so wash away any DNA. But to actually keep it, why? It gets me every time.
Well, I think the obvious thing here, and we've discussed it many times, I believe that this is a two-part crime. The murder itself, and the planting. And I'm not sure that both parties are related or know each other. I believe it was an opportunity seen by some third party. I'm not saying law enforcement, not blaming anybody, but someone saw the opportunity to use the RAV to plant against Stephen. But it all boils down to one thing. Where did the blood come from? Okay. We could understand the RAV could have been found at the side of the road. It could have been at the turnaround, etc., etc. Someone could have moved the RAV in the early hours of the morning. No one would have seen it, because if they're rural roads, there's hardly any traffic on those roads. But the fundamental question still comes down to, where did the blood come from? Now, Kathleen Zellner is pointing a finger at Bobby Dassey. Me, I'll point to the crime lab, because the crime lab is able to do the entire lot, right? You can make fake blood, you can manipulate results, and yes, I understand that A9, which is the blood on the seat, is not something that you can easily swap, right, Kelly? It's not a swab. It's
Exactly.
a solid drop of blood on a material, right? And so there are a lot of questions, right? Where did that liquid blood actually come from? That blood, i.e. the DNA, is closer to when Stephen was his age in 2005. So we know it's not from a purple top tube. So the question is, where did that blood come from? If Culhane planted that blood, how did she do it? Now, she's a serologist, so she's got experience. Could she have reconstituted some of the blood from the swabs, from the Pontiac Grand Dam, from the sink? Who knows? But there's one thing you got to do first, right, guys? You have to type the DNA. You have to prove that the blood that you plant only belongs to Stephen. Otherwise, you've got no case. So hence, the only person I know who had Stephen's DNA in the lab in 2003 is none other than my ex-girlfriend, Cherie Culhane, right? And there you go. So if someone was going to do this as a favor in quotations, it's her. No one will know.
Well, guys, it is that time of the episode where I throw the discussion back over to Big Jeff for his wrap-up comments. So, Big Jeff, if you wouldn't give us a little recap today and your thoughts as we lead out of episode 22.
Well, my bold prediction almost fell through. It was a little bolder than we might have thought, because we didn't get through very much. But it was I thought it was very interesting, as the whole panel did, to see the sausage making, if you will, inside of Kathleen Zellner's law offices, where she was rather open about her strategy. And as you said, maybe maybe there's some things that left that I didn't talk about in front of the cameras, but I thought it was interesting to hear her strategy and laid out, and that was clearly the strategy she was following. I really enjoyed the subject of the victimology. I think everyone in the panel, and I'm sure in the chat, is really upset that didn't happen. The victimology, that is, and just as a parting thought, it's not only the prosecution that has the opportunity to do a victimology, right? There's no reason why Dean and Jerry couldn't have hired. Well, there is one reason, but it would have been a perfectly allowable strategy to hire somebody, to do some investigation, about lifestyle, etc., and perform one on Teresa, not just who was in her life that day, what type of life she led. Our friend Mr. Kratz, was that the more Teresa appeared as Saint Teresa, the happier Mr. Kratz was, right? I mean, that really, that really was a point that played well for him. And maybe the juries don't like you to hear you, and maybe it doesn't play well. I mean, with the juries to sort of denigrate the victim. I don't know. But it was a good episode. I really enjoyed the conversation with the panel today. And getting ready for the next one is going to be a priority. So on to the next.
Well, thank you very much for those comments, Big Jeff. I will hand it over to Dr. Silkman next with a question, and that is, was the price of hairspray related to why you ended the relationship with your...
Now, well, she's got more hair than what I've got. But no, I found it a very intriguing episode. I really love this panel. I love the discussion that we come up with. I believe we only covered about two minutes of the actual episode. So, Big Jeff, I think we've broken a record here. But it goes to show how healthy the panel is and the depth of discussion as well. It's fantastic. I'm always learning new things, and I hope everyone in chat is as well. I personally believe that a thorough victimology should have been done, right? I mean, yeah, sure. I know the RAV4 pointed to Stephen, but I tell you what, did he have a co-conspirator? Were there co-conspirators? Was Stephen set up? We're not going to find out now, because a proper, thorough victimology was not done. Really, when you think about it, it really wasn't. And I believe a lot of opportunities have been lost. But yeah, really enjoyed the episode and can't wait for the next one. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman, and thank you for those comments. Kellie, if you wouldn't do the honor and responsibility of leading us out of episode 22.
Sure. I have to agree with the gentleman. These episodes I really enjoy because it takes us back to the basics. It takes us back to the beginning. We get to hashtag all the, things that have already been out there, but we get to recap it. And where we are in the case now, it is hindsight, but it just brings everything back into perspective of the case itself. What was done, what wasn't done, and what could have been achieved more if things were investigated more. Thank you to everyone that always joins us in chat. We always get some good feedback. We get some great questions. And yeah, thank you for having me back, and on to the next.
Well, thank you very much, Kellie. Yes, and as Big Jeff always says, on to the next. So for Kellie and Big Jeff and Dr. Silkman, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.